The evening air carried the scent of grilled onions and fresh bread through the windows of Romano's family restaurant as Lieutenant Commander Isabella Reyes settled into the corner booth she had specifically chosen. The red vinyl cushions creaked softly beneath her as she adjusted her position, her back naturally finding its place against the wall where she could observe the entire dining room. Old habits from years of military service died hard, even during her precious few hours of leave. Isabella had traded her crisp navy uniform for a simple sundress and cardigan, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the regulation bun that had become second nature. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another young woman enjoying a quiet dinner alone, perhaps a local teacher or office worker unwinding after a long day. The calluses on her hands from countless hours of combat training were hidden beneath carefully applied lotion, and her posture had relaxed into the casual slouch of civilian life. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted apron, approached with a warm smile. Maria, according to her name tag, had the maternal energy that reminded Isabella of her own mother back in San Antonio. The familiar comfort of being treated like any other customer rather than a military officer felt like a small luxury. Before we dive deeper into Isabella's evening, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar quiet moments of service members trying to blend into civilian life in your community. Romano's buzzed with the gentle hum of families sharing meals and couples lost in conversation. The acoustic tiles above muffled most sounds into a comfortable murmur, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter from a nearby table where 3 generations of an Italian family gestured animatedly over plates of steaming pasta. Isabella found herself smiling at their enthusiasm, remembering similar gatherings with her own extended family during holidays when she could make it home. Isabella had just taken her first bite of the chicken parmesan when the restaurant's atmosphere shifted. The front door swung open with more force than necessary, causing the little bell above it to jangle harshly against the glass. 3 men entered like a storm front moving across calm waters, their voices already raised in boisterous conversation that cut through the gentle dinner ambience like a blade. The first man, broad-shouldered with a beer gut straining against his plaid shirt, surveyed the dining room with the entitled swagger of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His companions flanked him like loyal deputies, one tall and lanky with greasy hair slicked back, the other shorter but stockier, his arms covered in tattoos that spoke of poor decisions and cheaper ink. Their boots thundered against the tile floor as they made their way to a table near the center of the restaurant, completely oblivious to the way conversations quieted in their wake. Maria approached their table with professional courtesy, despite the obvious tension radiating from their presence. Isabella watched from her corner booth as the lead man barked his order without looking up from his phone, dismissing the waitress with a wave of his hand as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. The casual disrespect made Isabella's jaw tighten slightly, a reflexive response to witnessing the mistreatment of someone who reminded her so much of her own mother. The 3 men's conversation grew louder as they settled in, their crude jokes and aggressive laughter creating an uncomfortable undercurrent that began to affect the other diners. Isabella noticed how the Italian family's animated gestures became more subdued, how the elderly couple at the window booth leaned closer together as if seeking protection from the intrusion. Even the kitchen's sounds seemed to quiet, as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath. She took another bite of her dinner, forcing herself to maintain the facade of the oblivious civilian, even as every instinct honed by years of military training told her to assess the potential threat these men represented. The harassment began subtly, as it always did. Isabella recognized the pattern from her military training on hostile environments and predatory behavior. The lead man, who had introduced himself loudly to his companions as Derek, started with seemingly innocent comments directed at Maria whenever she passed their table. His eyes would follow her movements across the dining room, and he would lean back in his chair with a smirk that made Isabella's skin crawl. When Maria returned with their appetizers, Derek made a show of looking her up and down before commenting on how the restaurant uniform really showed off her figure. His friends erupted in laughter that sounded more like barking than genuine amusement. Maria's cheeks flushed red, but she maintained her professional composure, setting down their plates with practiced efficiency while avoiding eye contact. The other diners began to notice. Isabella watched as conversations grew more stilted, as parents instinctively moved their children's chairs closer to their own tables, as the elderly couple by the window exchanged worried glances. The comfortable family atmosphere that had drawn Isabella to Romano's was evaporating like steam from a hot plate left too long in the cold air. Derek's behavior escalated with each interaction. When Maria brought their main courses, he deliberately brushed his hand against hers while reaching for his plate, then made a crude joke about how soft her skin felt. His lanky friend chimed in with an equally inappropriate comment about what else might feel that soft, causing the stocky one with tattoos to pound the table in appreciation. Isabella set down her fork with deliberate control, her appetite completely gone. She could see Maria's hands trembling slightly as she tried to maintain her professional demeanor, could witness the way the other staff members had begun avoiding their section of the dining room. The restaurant owner, a portly man with kind eyes, watched from behind the counter with obvious concern, but seemed uncertain about how to intervene without escalating the situation further. Isabella's posture began to change almost imperceptibly, her shoulders squaring as years of military bearing reasserted itself beneath the civilian facade. When Derek grabbed Maria's wrist as she tried to clear their empty appetizer plates, something shifted in the restaurant's atmosphere like the moment before lightning strikes. Isabella's hand moved to rest flat on the table, her fingers spread in a position that looked casual but provided optimal leverage for rapid movement. Derek held Maria's wrist longer than necessary, his grip tight enough to leave marks on her olive skin. He leaned forward with alcohol-fueled confidence, his voice carrying across the now-silent dining room as he suggested Maria might want to join them for drinks after a shift ended. The lanky friend added that they knew how to show a working girl a really good time, while the tattooed one made kissing sounds that echoed obscenely in the quiet space. Maria tried to pull away, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked them to please let her go. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, silently pleading for someone, anyone, to intervene. The other diners looked down at their plates or found sudden interest in their phones, the universal response of people who wanted to help but feared making themselves targets. Isabella rose from her booth with fluid grace, her movement so smooth it barely registered at first. She approached their table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command, though she kept her voice level and diplomatic. "Excuse me," she said pleasantly, "but I think the lady asked you to let her go." Her tone carried the subtle authority of someone used to being obeyed, though Derek was too intoxicated and entitled to recognize the warning signs. Derek released Maria's wrist, but turned his aggressive attention toward Isabella with a sneer that revealed yellowed teeth. He looked her up and down with the same predatory assessment he had used on the waitress, clearly viewing this interruption as an opportunity rather than a deterrent to his behavior. Derek's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam of someone who had found fresh prey. He pushed back from the table with theatrical swagger, his chair scraping loudly against the tile floor as he stood to face Isabella. Well, he drawled, looking her up and down with obvious approval. "Looks like we got ourselves a little hero tonight, boys." His companions snickered as they flanked him, forming a semicircle that effectively blocked Isabella's path back to her booth. The restaurant had fallen into complete silence now, the only sounds coming from the kitchen where the staff continued their work, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the dining room. Isabella could feel every pair of eyes in the place watching the confrontation, could sense the collective held breath of patrons who knew they were witnessing something that could turn very ugly very quickly. Derek stepped closer, invading Isabella's personal space with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "You know what, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with mock concern, "maybe you should mind your own business before you get yourself into trouble you can't handle." His breath reeked of beer and aggression, and Isabella could see the calculating look in his eyes as he sized her up like a wolf evaluating a lamb. Isabella remained perfectly still, her hands relaxed at her sides, but her feet positioned in a stance that looked casual while providing optimal balance and mobility. Her voice remained calm and controlled when she responded, though those trained to recognize such things might have noticed the subtle edge that crept into her tone. "I think there's been enough trouble already," she said evenly. "Why don't you gentlemen finish your meal and let everyone else enjoy their evening in peace?" Derek's face flushed red with anger at what he perceived as defiance from someone he expected to cower before his intimidation. His friends moved closer, their body language shifting from casual harassment to active threat as they prepared to support whatever escalation their leader decided to pursue. The restaurant owner finally emerged from behind the counter, his face pale with anxiety as he approached the tense standoff. "Gentlemen, please," he said in accented English, his voice shaking slightly. "This is family restaurant. We don't want trouble here." His hands wrung a dish towel nervously as he tried to position himself between the men and Isabella, though his diminutive stature made him appear more like a concerned grandfather than an authority figure. Derek turned his sneer toward the owner with contempt that made Isabella's blood boil. "This ain't your concern, old man," he growled, jabbing a thick finger toward the kitchen. "Why don't you go back to making your pasta and let the adults handle this?" His friends laughed at the dismissal, clearly enjoying the power they held over the frightened restaurant staff and intimidated patrons. Isabella stepped slightly forward, drawing Derek's attention back to her before he could further humiliate the kind man who had tried to help. Her movement was subtle but deliberate, placing herself between the aggressors and both Maria and the owner. The protective instinct that had been drilled into her through countless hours of training was beginning to override her desire to maintain her civilian cover. Maria had retreated behind the counter, her hands clutching the edge as she watched the confrontation with wide, fearful eyes. Other staff members peered out from the kitchen doorway, their faces etched with concern but clearly uncertain about what action to take. The other diners remained frozen in their seats, some fumbling with their phones as if debating whether to call for help. Derek's patience with diplomatic solutions was clearly wearing thin. His stance became more aggressive, his shoulders rolling forward as he prepared to escalate beyond verbal intimidation. "You got about 5 seconds to walk away, Princess," he snarled at Isabella, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "After that, me and my boys are going to have to teach you some manners the hard way." His companions cracked their knuckles in synchronized menace, clearly experienced in this type of coordinated intimidation. The critical moment arrived with Derek's meaty hand reaching out to grab Isabella's shoulder, his fingers spread wide to establish dominance through physical contact. Time seemed to slow as his palm approached the soft fabric of her cardigan, his intention clear to everyone watching. He planned to shove her aside, to demonstrate his power over what he perceived as a defensible woman who had dared to challenge his authority in front of witnesses. Isabella felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with crossing the threshold from diplomacy to defense. Years of combat training kicked in as Derek's hand made contact with her shoulder, his grip tightening with the intention of pushing her backward into submission. The lanky friend moved to flank her left side, while the tattooed one positioned himself to her right, clearly executing a practiced maneuver they had used to intimidate others in the past. The touch triggered something primal in Isabella's military conditioning. Her body responded before her mind fully processed the threat, muscle memory taking over as Derek applied pressure to force her backward. Every hour spent in hand-to-hand combat training, every scenario practiced on the base, every instinct honed through years of service crystallized into this single moment of transition from victim to warrior. Derek's confident smirk began to falter as he felt unexpected resistance beneath his grip. Instead of stumbling backward as he expected, Isabella remained perfectly balanced, her feet planted with the stability of someone who understood leverage and momentum. Her shoulder felt solid beneath his grasp, not the yielding softness he had anticipated for what appeared to be just another frightened civilian. The restaurant held its collective breath as patrons sensed something fundamental was about to change. Maria's hands flew to her mouth as she watched from behind the counter, while the owner stepped back instinctively, recognizing the shift in dynamics, even if he couldn't quite understand what was happening. Derek's confusion was evident as his easy intimidation tactic met with unexpected resistance from someone he had completely underestimated. Isabella's transformation began in the space between heartbeats, a metamorphosis so complete it seemed to alter the very air around her. The soft features of the peaceful dinner patron hardened into the focused intensity of a warrior trained to neutralize threats with surgical precision. Her stance shifted from passive resistance to active readiness, her weight distributing across both feet in perfect balance as years of military conditioning overrode every instinct to remain undercover. Derek felt the change immediately, though his alcohol-clouded mind couldn't process what was happening fast enough to react appropriately. The shoulder beneath his grip had transformed from yielding flesh into something that felt more like coiled steel wrapped in silk. Isabella's entire body language shifted with the fluid grace of someone transitioning from defensive to offensive posture, and Derek's confident smirk began to crack as primitive survival instincts finally penetrated his arrogant haze. The restaurant patrons watched in fascination as the mild-mannered woman they had seen quietly eating dinner moments before seemed to grow taller, more imposing, despite not moving from her position. Her eyes, which had been soft and diplomatic throughout the confrontation, now held the cold calculation of someone assessing multiple threats and formulating response strategies with lightning speed. Isabella's breathing shifted to the controlled rhythm taught in advanced combat training, each inhale feeding oxygen to muscles that were preparing for explosive action. Her hands, which had remained relaxed at her sides throughout Derek's escalating aggression, now positioned themselves with subtle precision that spoke of countless hours practicing defensive techniques until they became as natural as breathing. Derek's grip on her shoulder tightened as he attempted to reassert control over a situation that was rapidly slipping beyond his comprehension. His friends sensed the change as well, their own postures becoming more uncertain as they realized the woman they had planned to intimidate was radiating a dangerous energy that set every primitive alarm bell in their alcohol-dulled minds ringing with sudden urgency. Isabella's response was a masterclass in controlled violence, executed with the precision of someone trained to neutralize threats while minimizing collateral damage. Her left hand shot up to capture Derek's wrist in a grip that combined leverage points taught in advanced combat training, her fingers finding pressure points that immediately sent shooting pain up his arm. Before he could react, her right hand delivered a swift strike to his solar plexus that folded him forward like a closing book. The lanky friend lunged toward her left side, clearly expecting to catch her off balance while she dealt with Derek. Isabella pivoted with fluid grace, using Derek's stumbling form as a shield while her elbow found the approaching attacker's ribs with surgical accuracy. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a whoosh that echoed through the silent restaurant, and he doubled over, gasping for breath he couldn't find. The tattooed man hesitated for a crucial half-second, his brain struggling to process how quickly his companions had been neutralized. That moment of uncertainty cost him dearly as Isabella spun to face him, her movements flowing like water but striking with the force of steel. Her foot swept his legs with a technique that sent him crashing into an empty chair, the furniture splintering under his weight as he hit the floor hard. The entire sequence had taken less than 15 seconds, a ballet of violence so swift and efficient that many of the restaurant patrons were still processing what they had witnessed. Derek lay curled on the floor, clutching his midsection while struggling to draw breath. His friends flanked him in similar states of incapacitation, their earlier swagger replaced by groans of pain and confusion. Isabella stood in the center of the wreckage, her breathing barely elevated despite the explosive action. Her sundress was still pristine, her hair only slightly disheveled, as if she had simply been rearranging furniture rather than dismantling three grown men with the clinical efficiency of a trained warrior. The transformation from mild-mannered civilian to lethal combatant had been so complete that the restaurant felt like it existed in an entirely different reality than it had moments before. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the labored breathing of three men who had learned a lesson they would never forget. Isabella surveyed the scene with the calm assessment of a professional evaluating completed work, her eyes checking each neutralized threat to ensure they posed no further danger. Her posture remained alert but relaxed, ready to respond if any of them were foolish enough to attempt a second round. Derek struggled to push himself up on his elbows, his face pale with shock and pain as he stared at the woman who had just dismantled his entire crew with surgical precision. The arrogant sneer had been replaced by a mixture of fear and bewilderment as his brain tried to reconcile the gentle-looking woman in the sundress with the warrior who had just taught him the true meaning of consequences. The restaurant owner was the first to break the stunned silence, his voice filled with awe as he approached Isabella with newfound respect. "Miss," he said quietly, his accent thick with emotion, "thank you. You're military, yes." It was not a question, but a statement of recognition from someone who had clearly seen enough of the world to recognize a trained soldier when he witnessed one in action. Isabella's demeanor softened slightly as she addressed the kind man who had tried to help despite his own fear. "Navy," she confirmed with a small nod, her voice returning to the gentle tone she had used earlier in the evening. "Lieutenant Commander Isabella Reyes." She straightened her cardigan and smoothed her hair with practiced efficiency, the transformation back toward civilian appearance beginning even as her military bearing remained evident to anyone who knew what to look for. Maria emerged from behind the counter, tears streaming down her cheeks as she approached the woman who had protected her from a situation that could have ended much worse. The other patrons began to stir from their shocked silence, murmurs of amazement and gratitude rippling through the dining room as they realized they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The sound of sirens grew louder as police vehicles approached Romano's, their red and blue lights casting dancing shadows through the restaurant windows. Someone had called for help during the confrontation, though by the time Officer Martinez and his partner entered the establishment, the situation had been thoroughly resolved by forces they never could have anticipated. Isabella stood calmly beside the three groaning men, her hands visible and her posture non-threatening as the officers assessed the scene. The contrast between her serene appearance and the chaos surrounding her was so striking that Officer Martinez initially assumed she must be another victim rather than the person responsible for neutralizing three aggressive men. Derek attempted to paint himself as the victim when the officers began taking statements, claiming they had been assaulted by a crazy woman who attacked them without provocation. His story quickly fell apart as witness after witness stepped forward to provide their own accounts of the evening's events. The elderly couple by the window, the Italian family, even the kitchen staff emerged to corroborate the same narrative of escalating harassment followed by defensive action. Maria's tearful testimony was particularly damning as she described Derek's physical assault and the fear she had felt before Isabella intervened. The restaurant owner produced security footage from cameras positioned throughout the dining room, the black and white images clearly showing Derek grabbing Isabella's shoulder and the swift defensive response that followed. Officer Martinez, a veteran with 20 years of experience, recognized military precision when he saw it. As Isabella presented her military identification and explained her training, his expression shifted from suspicion to professional respect. The three men were placed under arrest for assault, harassment, and disturbing the peace, their earlier bravado completely deflated as they realized how thoroughly their actions had backfired. Isabella declined medical attention, though the paramedics who arrived with the police were amazed to find that someone involved in a three-ginstone altercation showed no signs of injury whatsoever. The precision of her defensive techniques had been so perfect that she remained completely unharmed while effectively ending the threat. As the police vehicles departed with their 3 passengers, Romano's family restaurant began to transform into something it had never been before. The atmosphere of fear and tension evaporated, replaced by an energy of celebration and profound respect for the woman who had restored safety to their sanctuary. Isabella found herself surrounded by grateful patrons who wanted to shake her hand, thank her personally, and share their own stories of military family members. The restaurant owner insisted that Isabella's meal was on the house, not just for that evening, but for any time she chose to grace his establishment with her presence. Maria approached with fresh tears in her eyes, this time tears of gratitude rather than fear, as she hugged the woman who had protected her when no one else could. The gesture was so heartfelt that even Isabella, trained to maintain emotional control in all situations, felt her own eyes moisten with unexpected emotion. The elderly couple by the window made their way over to express their admiration, the grandfather revealing that he had served in the Korean War and recognized a true warrior when he saw one. The Italian family's patriarch raised his wine glass in a toast to courage and honor, his gesture echoed by every patron in the restaurant as they honored someone who had put herself at risk to protect others. Word of the evening's events would spread throughout the community in the days that followed, transforming Romano's into a place where people came not just for excellent food, but to visit the restaurant where a Navy hero had reminded everyone what true strength looked like. Isabella would return many times, always welcomed as family, always treated with the respect due to someone who had proven that heroes walk among us in the most unexpected forms. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when it mattered most. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose to use their strength to protect others rather than intimidate them.